VocalEye Almost Live Zoom. You Can't Get There From Here, Volume 2. Hosted by Amy Amantea, with special guests Christine Malec and JJ Hunt.
So welcome to the VocalEye Almost Live event. I'm Amy Amantea. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator for VocalEye, your host for these almost live events and a member of the blind community. I want to give a big shout out, a big thank you to our friends who have made donations and supported this platform. It's really we're really very grateful for that. And so thank you for all of that. If you want to make a donation, there's always a link posted in the chat. And if you'd like to support us in other ways, other than with your dollars, we also appreciate that. So you could write letters, you can send us testimonials about your experience. That's really super helpful when we apply for funding for keeping this platform going. If you happen to be watching this particular event on our YouTube channel, we sincerely hope that you like and subscribe. Okay, I'm gonna just switch focus for a moment and bring Ingrid Turk into the space, who's gonna offer us our land acknowledgement this evening. So Ingrid, space is yours.
Hi, everybody. As you heard, my name is Ingrid. I'm a describer for VocalEye, and I'm honored to give the land acknowledgement for VocalEye, which is based on the ancestral lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people who've stewarded these lands and waters for many thousands of years. And we appreciate that their stewardship has made this such a wonderful place to live, despite our having displaced them from their lands. It's important to acknowledge Indigenous people and their ancestral territories because it's an important part of addressing the historic wrongs done to Indigenous people here in North America. And it's part of the Truth and Reconciliation process developed here by the Canadian Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was established as a result of class action lawsuits against the Canadian government for the atrocities perpetrated against Indigenous people in the colonization of North America, particularly the residential school system. So the commission was responsible for compiling a report on the atrocities' effects by hearing testimony from the survivors of the residential schools and making recommendations that prevent such atrocities from happening ever again. And these recommendations have taken the form of 94 calls to action. So since the release of the 94 calls to action, Canada has been making an effort to address them. And one effort that organizations and individuals are making is land acknowledgements. But there are still 93 other recommendations, and progress is kind of slow. The most success so far has been in education, sports, and by individuals. So over the next few weeks, I'll talk about the calls to action and how each one is or isn't being addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid. I think that the 94 calls to action is a very long document. So I appreciate you holding our hand through that. It's
Happy
also
to.
not an accessible document.
Unfortunately.
So it's really nice to have a guide to be able to talk through these things. So thank you for that offer. Okay, friends, welcome. It's Wednesday, May the 4th, 2022. May the 4th be with you if you are a Star Wars fan. Today, we are proud to offer you our Almost Live event number 83. This is You Can't Get There From Here, Volume 2. These are audio plays from the Factory Theatre in Toronto. And joining me to talk a bit about these plays is our special guests in the space tonight. So let's welcome Christine Malec and JJ Hunt. Welcome, friends, as your squares appear in the space. So I'm really excited to have Christine and JJ back in the virtual room to share with us, because of course they're from Toronto and the Factory Theatre is in Toronto. And I actually have JJ, I don't know if you can see what's behind. Oh, of course you can see what's behind me because you have sight. But I was told this is Cabbagetown.
Yes, yep, that looks
Toronto,
like
does it look like Cabbagetown to you? I wouldn't
Yep.
know, but when I Googled photos of Cabbagetown, this came up. So I'm trusting the Google machine. So Christine and JJ, both from the Toronto area, are going to walk us through some of these plays that are set in Toronto or in the surrounding areas. So maybe we'll start with JJ. Let's, reintroduce yourself to the space, because folks, I hope they remember who you are, but just in case.
Yeah. It's been a while. So I'm JJ Hunt. I'm a describer here in Toronto, and I describe all kinds of things: movies, TV, museums, some live events, parades, and I'm also co-host of the Talk Description of Me podcast with the lovely and talented Christine Malec here. And that's where we describe the visuals of anything and everything. The visuals of the world around us is what we say. So I'm a describer guy and a Torontonian. So happy to talk on both of those topics tonight.
Awesome. Hey, Christine, who are you?
Hello, who am I? I ask myself that every day. Thank you for highlighting that, that existential struggle for me. My name's Christine Malec. I am a member of the blind community in Toronto. I'm an arts consultant and content creator. I'm a proud Torontonian too. I am proud to represent the city of Toronto to the rest of the country and the rest of the continent. I love this city. It's my home city, and so I love the diversity of it, the cultural life, and it just feels like home to me, And when I go away for a while and then I come back and I walk down the busy streets, I'm like, ah. It's home, even though it's loud and dense and busy and smelly sometimes, and it's my home. And so I am happy to be here to talk about my experience of being in Toronto as a happy citizen and as a member of the blind community here as well.
I would offer that many urban city are loud and smelly, and
Absolutely.
so I'm sure there are plenty of folks who maybe don't live in the Toronto area who are like, yep, I know what loud and busy and smelly.
That's right. I can relate to the stinkiness of the city life, right? Yeah.
That's right. If it isn't somebody's garbage from a restaurant that's decaying, it's the smell of carburetors and diesel fuel and whatever.
The smell of melting dog poo in the spring, right?
Melting dog.
Yeah, exactly.
The cigarette
thawing.
smoke. Yeah, and other smoke passing you in the space as you walk down the street. Oh yes, we're familiar.
But then there's noodle houses in Chinatown too, so it all goes.
Exactly.
Yes, noodle houses. Okay, awesome. Well, really happy to have you both back in the space. Christina, hasn't been that long since you've been with us when you presented your Around the Galaxy in 90 minutes event.
It was so fun.
I know. So yeah, I mean, this space should hopefully feel like home to you too, even though
it is. I had this lovely feeling of like little family, when I logged on earlier. I know what the space is like. I feel comfortable here now. I'm not nervous or anything.
I love that. It's a great community space.
Yes.
So maybe let's have a little bit of a chat about Factory Theater and what kind of work they do. I mean, some folks in the space will have experienced the volume 1 audio plays that we did last season. There were 5 audio plays. There are 5 audio plays in volume 2, but we're going to play 3 tonight, 3 short ones, and then 2 again on July the 6th. And you'll join us back for that as well. So, JJ, you want to set us up for what we're about to listen to tonight?
Yeah. So, I mean, we talk a little bit about what Factory Theater is. I mean, the Factory Theater has been around since the 1970. It was the Factory Theater Lab then, and it's well known for producing Canadian plays. I think the first theater that set out to produce Canadian plays exclusively. The space itself, I haven't been in years, in no small part because of this pandemic. But it's really interesting building. It occupies kind of 2 buildings that have been kind of pressed together side by side. One is a grand old house built in 1896, and then the other one is a large addition, but it's kind of its own separate building that kind of glommed onto the side. Right downtown, the old house is a yellow brick home in the Queen Anne Gothic style. So quirky asymmetrical design, irregular gabled rooftops, dormers, and old sash windows with fancy gingerbread trim on the roof line. So not exactly like the homes that you've got behind you in your Cabbagetown picture, but not too far off. You know, there's a bit of that. And then the new building is boxy building with you know, lots of glass and steel. So it's a totally different style for that other building. The main space has 200 fixed raked seats and a balcony with this old gold ornate facade that's original to the building. And then there's also a studio space in there as well. It's a black box space, so you can change it around and reconfigure it in lots of different ways. And it's got movable seats and risers in there, so we can imagine ourselves in those spaces if that helps get you into the theater mood.
I would imagine, and I don't know this for sure, but I know when we played the Arts Club audio plays, that they used the theater space to do the recording for the audio plays. And so
Yeah.
as you're talking about this black box, I'm wondering if Factory Theater has done the same thing, where they brought the actors into a space, kind of social distance them, set them up with their microphones, and they were all together to perform like actors on a stage.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm
Yeah.
imagining in my brain anyways.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. It would be a good way to do it. You've got the space, you've got the, you know, and you can, as you say, you can spread
Social
people
distance.
out a little bit
Yeah.
and give everyone separate mics. So, I mean, nice to be able to still use those spaces, even if you can't get audiences in, you
Yeah.
know, throughout these lockdown times.
And the value of being able to, sorry, Christine, I'll give you a moment, a second, but the value to be able to perform as like an ensemble cast
Yeah.
in the space. Otherwise, you're just going in and recording your lines and you aren't in the moment to respond to the other actors. So
Absolutely.
I think
Yeah.
that's a value too. Christine, go for it.
That's exactly what I was about to say. Is I'm not much of a performer myself, but I've been speaking with other performers. I've been so struck by their ache to perform and their ache to be in performance spaces and have an audience, or at least have other artists around them to perform with. And so as much as art consumers have missed that during the pandemic, I didn't realize until talking to some musicians and some actors how much performers miss it as well.
It's like withdrawal,
Mhm,
right?
Yeah.
mhm.
It's a real thing. But we are, you know, I don't know about you all in Toronto, or I guess in the wider province of Ontario, but theaters come back full force
Oh
in
yeah.
BC here. So are you
Oh,
experiencing the same thing there?
oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
heaven.
It's
Lots of
opening up.
concerts coming up.
Yeah, and a lot of the performances they're opening up their spaces again. The theaters are opening up. I actually have tickets to Cirque du Soleil
Very
on
nice.
Friday night, which I'm super excited about.
Which one?
It's the
No?
newest play. I honestly
Oh,
don't even remember the name of it. Their newest piece. It's just Cirque. I'm up for anything Cirque
yeah,
does. I've
yeah.
been to one live Cirque show before, and then seen a bunch. Well, and actually the Cirque du Soleil at the opening of the Pan Am and Pan Am Games when they were in Toronto. I actually described that live. One of the craziest gigs in my life, trying to describe Cirque du Soleil in the Sky Dome. They had 6 different stages, and because of all of the concerns around, you know, leaking information, we got nothing in advance. So it's just the lights come on and you're trying to describe Cirque du Soleil, and they were incorporating indigenous costuming and dancing, and oh my good, and we had nothing in advance. It was totally nerve-wracking while our voices are going out and being translated into 4 different languages simultaneously into the crowd. It was
No
it was
pressure.
something. It was awesome.
Wow. Well, we just learned a bit about some circus performing from Aaron Ball, who joined us in the space last week.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
So that was some interesting stuff. And Aaron and Bon Evans are going to come back in the Describers Cafe forum and talk to us about their creative access that they've created for their circus performances. So that's a whole other thing that we could talk about. But yeah, so keep your eyes on your emails or your ears or your fingers, however you're accessing your emails. Anyways, so let's refocus on our Factory Theater plays, because the first of 3 is called Casting. So maybe JJ, you want to set this up for us, and then
Yeah, so casting, there are two main characters in casting, a young man named Dhruv and a young woman named Marta. And it's an interesting one because a lot of the locations in this are more kind of office settings. They discuss kind of, there's some discussion about boloramas because they're casting a show in this one particular scene that takes place in a bowling. So they're discussing, what bowling alleys that they can use for shooting locations. And it's very funny when I listened to this in preview, just in preparation for this, and I know a lot of the bowling alleys that they were talking about. I've had my kids' birthday parties in a couple of these bowling alleys. One, I think I had some birthday parties at when I was a kid. But sadly, most of these bowling alleys are gone now because they have all been torn down and turned into condos, because that's the fate of everything
The
in
way of the
Toronto
world.
is. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's but really kind of interesting. I love the bowling alley vibe, the bowling alley, and they talk a little bit about it in the play, like what does setting the TV show within the play, what does it do to set it in this bowling alley versus this bowling alley? If it's in Shamrock, that's a smaller bowling alley, it looks like this and that. And what if it's at Playtime Bowlerama? That's a flashier one, lots of flashy lights, and whereas Shamrock's really old school. So kind of fun to consider the way the visuals of these bowling alleys translates into a different scene that they're going to be filming.
Mhm. So this one's about 24 minutes long. So these are all three of these are quite, there isn't one that's longer than about 33 minutes. So they're all quite digestible chunks. So I think what we'll do is we'll have a listen to it collectively, and then we'll come back and we'll share our thoughts and have some chats with the two of you about, Toronto stuff and the play stuff and all that kind of good stuff and all that kind of good stuff. So this one is
Yay.
casting by Ins Choi. So Rick, when you're ready, please play casting.
Due to copyright restrictions, excerpts of this presentation have not been recorded. Please check below for more information, including links to the material if it is hosted elsewhere.
All right, friends, we're back. That was casting by Ins Choi. For those of you who don't know, and maybe this is pertinent to folks who live in the local Vancouver area, but maybe for everybody, Ins Choi also wrote Kim's Convenience, which was a play that was recently here in Vancouver on the stage at the Stanley Theatre, but also I think is kind of well known, maybe mostly to Canadians as opposed to Americans, but it didn't surprise me one bit that because Kim's Convenience also has a lot of prejudice and racism kind of built into the script in an interesting way. This does too. Power dynamics, privilege, prejudice. I don't know, JJ, Christine, I want to start with that before we get into some of the details about the city, just because I think that it is one of the most glaringly obvious parts of this piece.
Yeah. And I wondered about when he wrote this, because of course Kim's Convenience went from the Fringe to much bigger theaters, and then got picked up by the CBC and became a very popular TV show, but ended somewhat recently. And was the plug was pulled on it, and once it got canceled or ended, really, a lot came out about representation in the writers' room, representation in casting, representation in terms of the executive producers and who knew what about, like some of the actors coming forward and saying, we've got a Korean cast, but no one anywhere else in the in the hierarchy was Korean or Asian at all. So no one had any expertise or understanding. People were very upset about this. And so I really wonder, when did he write this piece? Did that come after his experience in TV? Was he writing this while creating the TV show? Or is this an older piece that he had that he tweaked after going through that CBC experience?
That's a darn good question.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer for that, obviously, but that's a darn good question. Christine, what do you think about sort of the overarching theme of this particular piece?
To be honest, it makes me grateful for my tiny little life where I'm not in a position to be having the kind of conversation that those two characters had, because I I found it almost distasteful.
Mm.
Mm.
It was polarizing is the wrong word, but there was complexity and discomfort for me in the whole conversation. And uh, I think maybe that's the point.
Yeah.
I think that we're meant to sort of squirm and
Yeah.
figure. And I wasn't actually in sympathy with either of the characters. I didn't find either of them to be characters I felt like I didn't identify with
You
either
weren't
of
choosing a
them.
side. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and uh again, that's probably probably the point. And it raised something else for me too that I've often considered as a member of the blind community, and it's about uh the extent to which we do and don't know the ethnicity of people, and not just people on screen or people in the arts, but people in daily life. And of course, it's an outrage to even like think that, oh, blind people can't be racist or prejudiced, because that's just absurd. But there is an extent to which I feel out of the loop in a certain sense, because unless someone has an accent, uh, their ethnicity doesn't register for me.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
even then, that's an assumption.
right,
It's an
exactly,
assumption. So we're living in a world of assumptions. I
yeah.
mean, I suppose there are also visual assumptions, right, JJ? Like,
Well,
you
yes,
can look at a person and make an assumption about their race based on their skin color, and that is not the truth.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And we've got these ideas in our head, like brilliantly articulated in this idea of like, oh no, with this part, since the husband is already a white bookish person, I
Mhm.
have a presumption about who their partner could be and couldn't be.
Mhm.
Which is one of those things like that's a very cited thing. Why on earth would it matter that a tall black woman and a short white man can't go together? I mean, it's absurd. But then the moment at the very end, of course, when he's asked like, "Oh, who exists in this deputy police role?" and he's like, "Well, there is one woman, and it is an Asian woman, and her husband is a white young." Like, oh, it's just crushing because there is that you want to be pushing against it. There's at our best we know that that's absurd and we shouldn't be buying into that. And then the reality hits. It's like, oh yeah, but God, I mean, it's true. That is kind of what's out there. And then there's a chicken and an egg thing, right? Like,
Right.
which comes first? Our presumption about these things, our understanding that drives our, yeah, it
Yeah.
is complicated. And as Chris says, it's not like one person came across as the good guy, the bad guy here,
Mhm.
or the person I support and the one I don't. It's like, it's muckier than that. It's messier than that.
Yeah.
It brought up something else for me too that I've been thinking a lot about, which is the practice of self-description
Mhm.
in Zoom meetings or any kind of meetings. And so, if you're not familiar, it's where you'll be in a meeting space, and as well as introducing yourself and why you're there and who you are, you might say, "And I'm a middle-aged white lady with long, light-colored hair, and I'm wearing a red shawl." And the intention is so that if someone is in the group who is not sighted, they have a sense of what people look like. And it's controversial, and some blind
Yes.
people love it, and some blind people really don't. And uh, it's bringing that it's something I've been thinking about lately, anyway. And it's making me think this piece is making me think about it too, because to be honest, the one reason I enjoy it when self-description happens is because I'm really curious about the ethnicity of people in my city and
Mhm.
people in my world. And just because I want to know. I love diversity and I like to know where it exists. And so I hope that doesn't make me sound superficial, but that is the one thing about self-description that I like. And so I'm always kind of thinking about how we as members of the blind community relate to issues of ethnicity and diversity. And it's not always in the same mechanisms. It's not always the same processes that we
Mhm.
experience about how to understand and integrate diversity.
And I would again offer that when we share at least our diversity in the space, that's good for everybody, not just for folks that, because again, there are sighted folks that make assumptions that you are from a certain part of the world, or you must identify this way based on this or that, or a last name or an accent or a color of a skin, which could be completely wrong. So we all benefit from that. And I too, as somebody who doesn't recognize, has the privilege of recognizing some of these things in these spaces, I want to know that I'm in a safe place. And that's not a thing about ethnicity or race or religion. It's just about knowing who's in your environment, right? And then I can tell, okay, who don't I want to share stuff with, and what am I willing to share in this space, because you're familiar with who's in the room, how many people, so it also is a way of being space, making yourself feel safe in a space. That is, I think, also an important ingredient to this.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
when
go
I
ahead,
do a
JJ.
description, I was just going to say, when I do a description, a self-description, and I identify myself as a middle-aged white guy, one of the reasons I'm doing that is because people need to know that especially as a describer and
The
sometimes
lens.
storyteller,
Yeah.
that's my lens, and you should know that. Because I'm trying my best to be aware of my biases, but I'm not all the way there yet. I never will be, and so some of my biases are as of yet unnoted by me. And so you should run what I say through the middle-aged white guy filter.
Yeah.
That's appropriate,
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I mean, we could spend our entire time together just talking about that one subject, and not to oversimplify things, but I
Yeah.
want to just talk a bit, because we want to listen to the next play, a little bit about the spaces that we heard. So JJ, you started off by talking about the Bolaramas, and
Yeah.
now that they're condos now and that kind of thing, but talk a bit about, I don't know, I'm guessing that you could share with us a story about a Bolarama or two,
Oh God.
considering that there were some birthday parties that were had in these spaces.
Yeah, they're great. The Bathurst Bolorama was one that I took my my youngest. He had some birthday parties there, and then the Bolorama West, when it was right on the edge of being turned into a condo. It was surrounded by construction sites. It was this like lone building right in the middle of nothingness, with it, nothing but big streets and construction sites all around. And they had incredible deals because they were just barely open. And so you could get your you could take kids after school for $5 a kid. And so for a while I was rounding up all the kids I could get after school, and I would, pile them all onto the subway, and we'd go down to the Bolorama. And the kids loved it because it was ancient and no one cared about anything. They knew the next thing that was going to happen to this bowling alley was it was going to be torn down. So all the balls of these, black 5-pin balls with streaks. They looked like planets, streaks of red and gold and faded yellow in there. And they would roll down long troughs, metal troughs, to go from behind the pins and then come up to be bowled. These blue chipped paint, metal troughs. And they still had the really old fashioned, they had a little roller ball that was sitting in a pool of water, and you would rub your hand back and forth on it to moisten your hand, and then dry it over an air dryer. And the whole thing was ancient. The shoes had been there since forever, and all lined up behind the counter, and they still had the greasiest little diner attached to the place where you could get, the hamburger for $1.25. I mean, oh, just horrendous. I loved taking the kids there, and I would tell them stories about how my dad, when he was a little kid, his first job was a pin setter at a bowling alley. So before it was mechanized, my dad would hang out behind the pins. When they got
Set them
knocked
up.
down, he would jump down and set all the pins up again. Very, very retro vibe in these places, because in a lot of cases, they got ignored forever. And so that kind of 1950s snazzy, the future is plastic and everything is great kind of vibe just carried on until it faded and faded and faded, and then finally got ripped down and became a condo. So that's like remembering those spaces is, I do have a soft spot for the bowling alley.
How about for you, Christine? Have you got any bowling memories? Did you do bowling? Any of
I
these games?
do have a few, but it actually triggered something much more fun and recent for me,
Ah,
which is they mentioned a bowling alley near Yorkdale. So Yorkdale Mall is a pretty shishy upscale mall in the northwest quadrant of Toronto, which is not too far from where I live. And for my birthday a few years ago, I wanted to go axe throwing. And so also New Yorkdale Mall, and it had a bit of a bowling alley vibe. There's this new facility that had like axe throwing and knife throwing and all kinds of strange newfangled, things that people would do. That's kind of, if there's a replacement for bowling, I would argue that it's
Yeah.
axe throwing. And so um we took the transit up to Yorkdale, and then the bus wasn't running, so we had to take this dodgy walk through these gritty streets and industrial area, and wound up at this big sprawling facility that was eerily empty because it was new. And we were like a little island of people in this big ocean of empty space. And we did axe throwing, and it rocked. It was so much more fun than I expected. And so my memories of bowling are pretty meh, and I didn't do well at it, but I'm just going to brag because I'm totally blind and I got a bullseye. Ha ha! I have a picture. I have a picture of me holding my hand up, holding onto the handle of the axe that I threw into the bullseye at axe throwing. So maybe the Bowlerama at Yorkdale. I don't know. They said condo, but I like to think it was replaced by the axe throwing facility.
I have not been axe throwing. I've been bowling many times. Not post sight loss. But even before sight loss, bumper lanes were always my friend. We'll just
Yeah.
put that out there that I rocked at bowling when we had bumper lanes.
Yeah, that's good. Bounce it all the way down. Were you a 5-pin or a 10-pin bowler?
Both.
Oh,
Yeah, but I preferred 10 pin.
Hardcore.
Yeah.
hardcore.
Yeah. The real heavy balls.
That's
That's right.
they're heavy.
Yeah. All right, friends. Well, we have another audio play to listen to. So, JJ, I'm wondering if you feel like setting this one up for us. This one would be episode 2, and it's called The Standard Sing,
Yes.
and it's by Marjorie Chan. So, what is the Standard Sing?
So 3 characters to know about in this one: a young woman named Helen, a young man named Justin, and they meet Mr. Singh. We'll leave him to be a little bit of a mystery because he's an interesting character. This one takes place in Chinatown. And Chinatown is one of those neighborhoods in Toronto that is it's a staple for me. I know I go to Toronto's Chinatown all the time, and Toronto's Chinatown is a little bit different than Vancouver's Chinatown. Vancouver's is bigger, not by too much, but it is bigger than Toronto's Chinatown. And Toronto's Chinatown is really all about the restaurants, not the architecture. There's very little about the architecture in Toronto's Chinatown that is distinctively Chinese. It's really just about the shop fronts and the restaurants and so on and so forth. But this a lot of this play takes place in a movie theater in Chinatown, one that I never got to go to. And I kind of wish I did, especially after having previewed this particular play. It's a good one.
Well, I suppose we can lament about that after we come back from listening to The Standard Sing. And this is about 33 minutes long, friends. And of course, we didn't throw out a content warning for the first one, but engage at your own capacity, right? So if you need to disengage, that's okay too. So Rick, why don't you play The Standard Sing?
Due to copyright restrictions, excerpts of this presentation have not been recorded. Please check below for more information, including links to the material if it is hosted elsewhere.
Okay. Kind of creeped out. I don't know. First impressions, JJ, of this piece?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like the creepiness of it.
I do
love
too.
The creepiness of the old theater. There are lots of these kind of hidden theaters all around the city that have just, they've had a dozen different lives that are now kind of boarded up and just being absorbed into other spaces. So the idea of hiding out in some of them, and what's lurking in there. I also love this uh, the idea of being trapped, of coming to this country, coming to Canada, and getting trapped here, and kind of locked in tradition. That's a really interesting idea. Yeah, I kind of like this piece. It's a fun one.
Yeah. Christine, how about for you? First impressions or things that stuck out for you?
I've got goosebumps. It I liked the creepiness of it too, and I liked the complexity because most of it was, oh, celebrate your heritage and know your past, and um, important but somewhat conventional messages. But then there's this other layer of that the past can trap you, and the
Yeah.
past isn't necessarily a nostalgic safe place, that you can study and be okay with. And it's giving me a bit of funny resonance too to Ingrid's land acknowledgement, because she referenced, residential schools and the trapped
Mm,
element there too. And there's this horrible resonance there of um, Indigenous people, immigrants, the ways that people who become marginalized by a colonial, yeah, there's a trapped element there. And so, yeah, very, 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 very creepy. And it, 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 it speaks to something that I also think about a lot, which is how children of people who emigrate, how they live and make sense of their lives and their home, and how their parents make sense of that. So one of the things I do as a volunteer is I tutor English English conversation, and so I get the chance to speak with people who've come to Canada from other places, and it takes so much courage and so much
Mm.
strength and dedication to learn English, to learn a culture, and then to take the risk of having children who won't be like you. They won't be the ethnicity that you are. There'll be some version of that, but Canadian too. And yeah, this piece, I really, really liked it. There was so many important elements that it referenced about the Canadian experience, and just the creepiness and the hidden things that are in the city where you live that you won't know about.
I had
Very
this chat about immigration with my father the other day because our family comes from Italy, and how when his grandparents came over from Italy, they they made this decision: we are now Canadians, no more Italian. We are
mm,
now going to speak English. And so
yeah.
subsequently, my father's parents didn't know a lot of Italian, and he knows none,
mm,
other than capiche, right? the one Italian word everybody knows. But
Yeah.
but that sort of that loss of culture or heritage that can sometimes happen, and it did happen to some extent for Justin in this piece, that he wasn't feeling as connected as Helen was.
mm.
So that is super interesting. I just want to unpack a little bit about Mr. Singh in this piece, because the is he, isn't he, right? Like, he kind of appears as a ghost, and then, oh no, he's the caretaker, and then, oh well, maybe he's not, or is he a version of the two, or
Yeah.
so what are your takes on that, JJ?
Yeah, I don't know how long has he been there? How long is he what has trapped him? What has he turned into? And what does it mean that he can leave? Can he actually just be a person who walks out the door again? Or does leaving mean he's finally allowed to die? Like, I mean, what are the different possibilities for this character? And the sound effects, the
Yeah.
sound
Woo.
of Justin transforming or being taken over. That's one of the things I love about audio dramas is as a sighted person, we often just get told, we're shown, here it is, here's what's happening. But with that sound, I don't know exactly what was happening, but it was effective. That it, like, whatever was happening was kind of gory and transformative. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. But I like that I don't know exactly what was going on there. How Justin was transforming, what Mr. Singh's story is from here out, Yeah, I don't know. What's your thought, Chris? Do you have
Yeah.
a
Supernatural for
theories?
sure,
Yeah.
Yeah.
paranormal for sure. And I liked the way that uh the character was so jovial and laughing, and I don't want to use the word cliche because he wasn't, but there was a certain typecast of like the jovial, friendly, non-threatening,
Yeah.
foreign person, uh and then he turns out to be something quite different, and definitely supernatural. And I just loved the way it kind of, he drew you in, he pushed you away, he drew you in, he pushed you away, he drew you in, he scared the crap out of you, and then he probably killed you.
Well, I was thinking that Mr. Singh was this some sort of a ghost is the only word I can use. This whole time, and then became a trickster and tricked them
Mm,
into
mm.
thinking that he was, an air quotes real person. And maybe this manifestation thing that happened in this sound effect that we're all trying to figure out is the in my mind, because I've seen so many horror and sci-fi and supernatural movies where um like that entity has been around for centuries and it just needs like a new host, and
Yeah.
then the old one floats away, and then now Justin's the new host of it. So Justin's the new Mr. Singh, and
Yeah.
he's here until the next person comes and he can trick them into that same thing.
Yeah.
I liked how and I'm not in any way a lover of horror, or anything suspenseful, anything. I'm very thin-skinned, but so maybe this is a total convention of the genre, but the way that Mr. Singh kind of capitalized on Justin's secret desires.
Mhm.
He wants money. He wants to feel like he's in the know. He wants to feel special. He really loves putting on those costumes and feeling like the superhero. And that's how Mr. Singh draws him in, is by exploiting Justin's, sort of secret desires. And there was a creepy satisfaction for, because I didn't Justin, he was a bit likable, but a bit self-seeking. Yeah,
Mhm.
and so I kind of enjoyed watching him get snared by his own desires.
Yeah.
It's a good piece of dramaturgical writing when you always have what does the character want in
Yeah.
your,
Mm,
as your focus, right?
mm.
I'm learning a lot about this recently. So what does the character want? What does the character need? And those two things are often not the same,
Yeah.
right?
Ooh,
So it's very
ooh.
interesting when you break down the pieces. I'm by no
Mhm.
means an expert, but I've been learning about some of this stuff.
Yeah, that's really it. What does he want versus what does he need?
Mhm. Yeah,
La.
yeah.
Yeah, good one.
Oh, all right, friends. Well, there was a comment in the chat from Doug and Diana that said straight out of the Twilight Zone.
Right?
So
Yeah,
I,
very
I
much.
echo that. I echo that. We've got a third audio play to listen to. So this is going to be episode 3, and it's called A Good Place. What is a good place? What do we need to know about this before we get into it, JJ?
A pretty simple cast, straightforward. 2 men, John and Jorge, and there's also a woman involved in this play named Shalimar. And this piece takes place in Kensington Market, which is actually very, very close to Chinatown in Toronto. So only a block apart. And it was interesting, Helen referenced how Chinatown was originally a very Jewish neighborhood. And I would say Kensington Market side of things kind of held on to that a little bit longer. And Kensington's got an amazing, crazy history of different ethnic groups living there at different times. The street evolved. The market that's in Kensington has evolved over time into this wild and wonderful. I mean, genuinely unique place in the city. But a lot of the architecture is still there from that era, from the era when it was the 1850s to the 1880s. Very old. And packed in tight. It's all about being packed in tight. And I think that energy of being packed in, held in, lots of people being squeezed into one neighborhood, one house, lots of tenement houses, apartments, subdivided houses into these little apartments. all of that energy is in this piece, in The Good Place.
Okay, so this is about 20 minutes long, friends. So we're going to listen to A Good Place and we'll come back and chat. So Rick, when you're ready, please play.
Due to copyright restrictions, excerpts of this presentation have not been recorded. Please check below for more information, including links to the material if it is hosted elsewhere.
A Good Place. Kensington.
Yeah.
Kensington a good place? I don't know. I've never been.
Kensington is a really good place. And I mean, very, for me listening to this piece, very tied into to this play, to this piece, right? The Kensington being everything, everyone packed in, but also a place of, and you could hear just a little bit, obviously, for, you know, good quality audio, they couldn't let the background noises burble up too much, but there was just a little bit of the street noise, and that's a very Kensington thing. It's like a lot of crowded cities where there's a lot of street activity. Kensington's got a lot going on, and when you walk through the neighborhood, you can hear all these little snippets of conversations in dozens of different languages, and of people of different ages having these different conversations. And I often wonder, like, what if you just stopped and listened to any one of those conversations? There's also a lot of people in Kensington who are kind of living on the edge, and things are happening in their lives. There's a lot of anxiety sometimes in people's existence there. And so to me, this piece felt like someone did stop and kind of just, peek into one of those units, one of those rooming houses, and just like listen for a little bit at what's going on in there. That's what this was like for me.
Yeah, me too. And actually, I have a blind friend who lives full on right in Kensington Market, and she's pretty hardened, I gotta say. So actually, it's a classic case because she's older than I am, and her parents came from Portugal and bought that house as many immigrant families do. That's their first goal, is to get a spot, get some real estate, get a house. So um, her house housed 14 people at one point when she was
Wow.
growing up. And so she lives there now. As a matter of fact, she's on her own in the house at this moment. And yeah, she's an urban dweller in the most intense sense. Like, certain neighborhoods you go to and you just predict there's going to be some unusual social interactions. There's people, as JJ well said, living on the edge or dealing with challenges that I don't understand, and it can feel threatening for sure. And I don't know if it's easy for me to say it's more scary when you're blind, but I think that's actually true, because there's an element of a scary situation, say, that you're not getting. So it's common for her to tell me stories about getting yelled at, or people, it's a certain amount of aggression, or sometimes really beautiful stories of people, oh, there's some construction, let me walk you around this thing, and the next thing you know, they're making a lunch date. So it's, the Kensington Market is rich with, and so you wouldn't say, "Ooh, it's a scary part of town." Not in any sense would you ever say that, as Toronto neighborhoods go. But it's a place where everything is
Yeah.
happening all in a block. You get everything. And so, yeah, having this story situated in Kensington Market is completely apt, that there's everything in that story, including hope and possibly redemption. But we don't know, because it ended kind of on a bit of a cliffhanger there, so we don't know what happened.
Yeah, and I think we're meant to understand that there is a relationship to sobriety in
Hmm.
this piece, maybe a relationship to folks that are in an AA program, a 12-step program,
Hmm.
that kind of thing,
Yeah.
which is just another, it's another layer. It's just another layer.
Mm.
As we continue this discussion, I want to invite friends from our audience in tonight to talk about or ask questions about, but to talk about things that in any of these pieces that resonated with you, that you were interested about, that confused you, that you know, sparked something in you. So I invite that in this space. Oh, and look at that. We already have a hand. Look at that. So Lori's gonna share a comment or a question. Go ahead, Lori.
I just want to say the last piece meant a lot to me because my father was a recovering alcoholic and my brother is a recovering drug addict. And seeing, this, it just brings back things what I grew up as a kid with my father drinking and also my mother. So this piece, had a lot, has a lot of meaning to me as seeing what my family went through. Tammy Grennan has left the meeting. As people who had addiction issues.
Right.
So, and I would say definitely the second one did kind of remind me of the Twilight Zone. It was very different. And I would say I kind of dozed off a little bit and stuff. I kind of had a little hard time following. The first one was really good. Really showed you how these people really, weren't sure about having somebody in color be on stage to perform and everything, and stuff, and how I know she wasn't comfortable with it or not, as to have somebody in color to be in their program or whatever, but that's just the impression that I got.
Really, it kind of, that first piece really is the kind of piece that, again, they all are. They spark discussion.
Yeah.
And I think all of them are sparking discussion about equity in different ways, which I think is really interesting, and how maybe when we experience the second or the last two episodes of volume 2, we might see that that's kind of part of a theme that they're exploring in this volume. Okay, we've got Louise and then we've got Megan. So go ahead, Louise, and Megan, you're on deck, so you can get ready to unmute yourself. Give Louise a moment.
Okay. Okay, I'm here. Okay, I'm going to say the first one was my favorite of all three.
Yeah.
First, and then the third. So with the first one, I saw something. I didn't just see culture. I saw people coming. I look at it another way, and maybe I'm looking at it differently because I live in an area here where there's so many different cultures out here in Surrey. Where when my kids started to school, when they went to elementary, when Anthony started in 1998, it was half and half. And I don't want to, and I want to say, 40, it was not even 40% other, 60% other culture, no, it was 60% white students compared to all the other cultures in the area. By the time my son left there in 2011, you saw 80% to 90%, depends on the year. You were starting to see it be more other culture. And talking to kids, because I was around the school a lot with my dogs, especially Hercules, I got into some conversation with kids, and some of them have been here for a short time and some who are here for a long time. And the ones who were here for a longer time said that they came when their parents, some were born here, some weren't. And the ones who were born here basically didn't know their own culture except what they learned at home. But they said it wasn't really the same as coming from the other country. The ones that came from the other country were taught to them about their culture. And it was really interesting hearing some of the conversation. So I actually think when we look at the first one, it's culture, comfortability. This woman didn't feel comfortable with what was around her in culture. And seeing what would work together. I saw it happen within the school. Culture and kids getting along. If you're brought up with that, you're more comfortable with it. And I think maybe she wasn't comfortable with it because she couldn't imagine something or piece things together and put it together in a way. And maybe I'm not explaining what I mean, but it's a way of some people just ignoring what's around them in culture. It's that she didn't want to accept that she could be wrong, that something could be different, and that it would actually perceive differently. it would come across on the screen differently, and that's not what she wanted. She wanted something to come, or I mean, in a play, you know what I'm saying, whatever. She didn't want it coming across not the way it was written. She wanted something coming across a certain way. She had an image, and she couldn't change her image of culture around her.
Yeah, I guess the question
She was
is,
locked.
how do we
She
get
was
to that
locked.
place, though? How do we get to that place?
And well, that's the one thing I think in the last, I'm going to say just over a year now, we've learned in since, you know, culture has been brought up and the graves were found, the first set of graves in Kelowna, or was it Kamloops? Which was Kamloops, I guess
you're
it was,
talking
wasn't
about,
it?
yeah, from the
Yeah,
Indigenous residential schools. Yeah.
Yes, as that started, as that came out, and we looked at the culture difference for that community and learning about their culture as humans, what have we done and how did we treat them? We treated them badly. Maybe not me or you specifically or anybody in this room, virtual room, but we as Canadians treated them rotten.
Historically,
They were here. We were here in our country. And I hope today, when we walk into a school or a mall or a restaurant where there's culture, let's learn about it. Let's sit down and figure out how can we integrate these cultures into our society.
Well, we're all people at the end of the day. We all
Yes,
have that in
but
common.
but I guarantee she was a person, and she didn't open her, well, I'm going to say her eyes to what could be different.
Yeah.
Her heart to it. She didn't open her mind, body, soul to it. He saw something that could be done and she didn't. And that caused him a friend. It caused even their friendship in the long run. It could have caused a play not to be as good because people didn't have an imagination or open to the reality of society.
Yeah. Thank you, Louise. Our communities are, it's important to have representation of what our communities actually look like on our screens and on our stages. And I think that was part of what that piece was getting to at its heart. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. Okay, Megan, you've been waiting patiently. It is your turn. So let's give Megan a moment to unmute.
Yes.
There you are, Megan.
Yes. Actually, I love them both. But it also, I loved the second one because kind of it's almost like when Mr. Ting started singing, the paranormal happened. Like all of a sudden they start singing. He teaches him how to sing, and all of a sudden,
yeah, I mean, I get why we need movies. We like movies to escape.
Like he kind of
I was reading about this thing.
like what he did, almost like when he starts singing.
Yeah.
He makes all of a sudden. He does this spell, almost like a spell, and he transforms, almost like a magical kind of feel. Like when he starts singing, and then they sing together, then it's like all of a sudden that spell is cast. He's transformed into him, almost like a spell. That song was like a spell, sort of thing.
I love how they used the not only the song but the idea of the make. You know, from the Cantonese opera, using both the audio and the idea of that very specific kind of makeup that was used in Cantonese opera, red and white face with very jet black eyebrows and extremely bright lips. And you know, to use the idea of both the song as transformation, but also the makeup as transformation, I thought was really effective.
Yeah.
But also when it is this song, it's almost felt like a spell. And all of a sudden when he all of a sudden gets really like like he starts screaming like, oh no, what's happening to me, right? You know, I can feel it. It's almost like he's doing some kind of spell somewhere.
Yeah. It was quite a spooky piece. Hey, Megan.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm like, oh, I wouldn't want to do that to my family. Like transform my mom and transform me into my mom and yeah.
Thanks. Thanks, Megan, for sharing your thoughts.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
that. Yeah, I don't know, for JJ and for Christine, while we're waiting for some other folks who might want to jump into the conversation, any standouts for you, any favorites for you, anything that you're still marinating on? It's a lot of questions, I know, but
I'm kind of thinking about religion, and because it came up in the last piece,
Yep.
and it's not something that comes up in entertainment or arts that I consume. And so it was interesting to me to encounter religion in, and it's part of diversity, isn't it? Like we talked a lot about diversity and inclusion and representation and the importance of that. And we tend to talk about that in the context of ethnicity or sexual orientation or gender identity. And we don't talk about it in terms of religion all that often. And frankly, that's a place where I'm comfortable with, because and it's one of the differences I think I noticed between Canadian culture and culture in the United States, is that there's more place for religion in public life in the United States, and in Canada, they're less so. And that's where I fit as a Canadian. I'm very comfortable with religion being something private, and so to encounter it in the arts was a little startling to me, and it made me go, "Oh, right, diversity, sure." And religion fits into inclusion and diversity as well, but it's just not a direction that we usually talk about unless it's a different religion from the mainstream of what we think of as Canada. So, Islamophobia is a real problem that we confront and we need to talk about. But encountering a Christian religion in a mainstream art piece, it was unusual enough to me that I noticed it and went, oh yeah, put that in a context for myself. So that was something that struck out for me in the last piece as well.
Yeah, I found it also kind of interesting. It was a little bit ambiguous as to uh, uh, whether it was going to have a positive impact on Jorge. Like it was clearly generally a good thing, but then it wasn't John that was able to calm him down with talk about, come on brother, come on brother, come on brother. It wasn't that when he was having his real moment of panic, his real moment of
Yeah.
anxiety, it was the woman who came in and said, have a smoke.
Right.
Like, I'm going to get you a drink. And it was like, oh, wait a minute. That's not supposed to be the good thing. That's supposed to be the bad thing. The smoke and the drink is what he's trying to get away from, isn't it? And then right at the very end, even when he's starting to pray, and it sounds like, okay, so now we're getting into the positive, like, okay, we're gonna pray and all will be well. She comes back in and says, oh, it's not cold. Is that okay? And I thought, oh,
Yeah.
that's kind of interesting. It's just a little bit of ambiguity about what's the positive influence, what's the negative influence, just enough to be, um, uh, not the typical story about this. Because you're right, Chris. Like when we hear about religion, it's especially Christian religion, it's often either presented as all good or all bad. If we're talking about it at all, it's because we're either in full support of or quite against.
Right.
And this was just
A
a
little
little bit ambiguous. I
ambiguous.
thought interesting.
And the woman, I think if I interpreted the audio correctly, I think she gave him a hug. And John did hold his hand, which is, I guess, the conventional guy equivalent of, but I noticed the not use of, but the place that affection had. And
Yeah.
that was what really melted him and really calmed him down. Right. The smoke for sure. But the first thing was the human contact.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. She was rougher, certainly. But when it came right down to it, she also expressed that kind of physical emotion, that kind of warmth.
The
Whereas
human connection.
I wasn't
Yeah.
getting that from John. I wasn't
what
getting
does
that
the
from him.
character need?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Looks
How
like
do they
he
get
needs
what they
some
want?
human
What does
affection.
Jorge need? And maybe that is about going back to his mother.
Right.
Right. There's that I mean, again, the stereotype of the mother is there's that maternal, human, loving, embracing connection. Now, not everybody has a parent or a mother like that,
Mhm.
but that is conventionally what we think about because, probably media has told us that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a really interesting, that's a really interesting perspective. And again, I threw into the space that the religion component for me was more about sobriety, was more about the serenity prayers and
Right.
and to me that focus on religion is different than being a religious person, because I think there are a lot of people that enter programs like an AA or a 12-step program that aren't religious, but they need something to hang on to
Yeah.
in order for that program to work.
Yeah, the
Yes.
structure.
Right? Yeah, you need some of that. So
Yeah.
that's so very interesting. There's lots of dynamics at play here in all three of these pieces. So I'm really excited when we come back on July the 6th to figure out whether these following two audio plays are going to be exploring some of the same themes.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love the theme of you can't get there from here. That's just so
They all say it.
broad. You
Yeah.
can, it's such a useful trope and it's it's a versatile phrase that can
Yeah.
mean a lot and can apply in a lot of situations or to a lot of places where you think you are, where you think you need to go, where you actually need to go, where you think you are. Yeah, it's a good ambiguous phrase that has a lot of applications.
It's a good
Totally. And-
prompt.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right. And some of the playwrights have clearly used that as almost like an end piece. Like that's, you build up to this idea that whatever it is, you can't get there from here. And then in other pieces, it's kind of just tucked in there, like
Yeah.
a little bit of a throwaway, but it still actually has meaning. Like in Mr. Singh's piece, they did a little bit of play with it. Like, oh no, you can't get up here from down there. No, wait a minute, you can't get here from there. Oh, it doesn't matter, I'll come down.
As though it's a language barrier, but really it's something more complicated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was a really nice and subtle way to kind of slide it in there.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting that. I appreciated that at the time
So I'm gonna throw one more thing out, because originally we talked about the first piece, casting, asking ourselves whether we thought Ins Choi had written this piece before.
Yeah.
But it's this theme of you can't get there from here, which is the factory theater prompt.
Yeah.
And so whether this moment that he's talking about, these moments come from, obviously they come from somewhere, but that would tell me that this piece is probably relatively recently written.
Yeah.
Or
Yes, that's right.
adapted.
That's right.
Oh, we're so brilliant in this space, friends.
That's right.
Aren't we great?
SMRT.
SMRT, that's right. Well, respecting that you folks are joining us from tomorrow, just past tomorrow, but tomorrow nonetheless, I say we do our prize draw. And after that, if folks from the community want to stick around and do some chit-chatting for a little bit, we'll keep the lines open for a bit. But who wants to do the prize draw?
I do.
Ah, she beat you to it, JJ.
Haha, I love picking random words.
Awesome.
That's what I get to do, right? When I'm ready, I can just blurt out a word.
So Sarah's going to join us in the space, and Sarah's got a list of the names of the folks that are still remaining on the call. And Sarah, you and Christine are going to negotiate our prize draw.
Hey, how are you? I'm here and I'm ready for the draw.
All right. So whenever I'm ready, I just blurt out the word of choice, right?
Yes, just any word you like.
Okay. 1, 2, chopstick.
Let me just double check that this person is still with us.
Love doing
Okay,
that.
so our winner is Barbara Campbell.
Woo, Barbara, congratulations. You won tonight's raffle prize. Ta-da! That's great, Barbara. I'm really excited that you have won a raffle prize. And as always, we will connect with you offline to make sure that we get you an appropriate prize for your geographical area. So that's great. With my greatest sense of gratitude and respect for the both of you, I really appreciate you joining us in this space, because I think it adds so much more to the discussion to have this layer of the neighborhoods that are being talked about and some of your experiences.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Good night, Megan.
Night.
So we want to officially say a great big thank you to JJ Hunt and to Christine Malec for joining us on this almost live virtual VocalEye event. And we'll see you next time in the space. For sure, we'll see you on July the 6th.
Yay.
Absolutely.
All
Absolutely.
right.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good one, folks.
VocalEye, vocaleye.ca. Special thanks to our funders, the Canada Council for the Arts, the British Columbia Arts Council, the Province of British Columbia, and the City of Vancouver.